Morning and welcome. We're going to let people filter in. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. Good morning, UC San Diego. I'm Jen Bowser, Sustainability Engagement Manager in Resource Management and Planning and Chair-elect of the Staff Association. On behalf of the Staff Association and Human Resources, I'd like to welcome you to Cabinet Conversations. Cabinet Conversations is a series of conversations with our cabinet leaders to get to know them on a more personal level and to hear from them on important issues that are impacting our campus. This series was developed out of feedback from the 2019 Staff at Work survey and the 2019 engagement survey conducted by the Council of UC Staff Assemblies, also known as CUSA, and also an Idea We Have campaign that was used in part to develop the Staff Association's strategic plan. Today we'll be speaking with our Chief Information Officer, Dr. Vince Kellen. We have received questions beforehand. If you would like to submit a question, please go ahead and do so in the Q&A. We will try to get to as many questions as time will allow. If you see both of us on your screen, you have your settings set correctly. All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, Vince. How are you?
I am great. How about you?
I'm good, thanks. You're somewhere very fun right now. Where are you?
I am in my hot air balloon above La Jolla Shores and the Scripps Pier there. So I love this background, and every time I use it, I get some really good comments from people outside of San Diego who kind of instantly recognize it. So I think it creates an emotional response in the audience. It's just fantastic.
That's phenomenal. I envision you in a basket of a hot air balloon. So I'll try to focus. And how are you doing? How are you spending your non-work time during social distancing? Do you have any hobbies?
Well, you know, I live in Escondido, a little bit north, and just right around Lake Hodges there. And so I've got 45 fruit trees, actually 52 now, 52 fruit trees on my 2 acres. And then I've also have 2 small greenhouses that I grow vegetables in. So I would have been the 4th generation greenhouse grower, but I discovered computers early in my life, and I've always done some form of gardening, and here I've been able to take advantage of Escondido and grow a lot of different fruit.
And what happens with the fruit?
One, I eat it along with all the vegetables. So I grow lettuce and tomatoes and peppers and all that in the greenhouse. And the orchard, it's mainly oranges, avocados, grapefruit, apple, pear. I got a couple peach plants, just planted some cherries and some more pears. But the biggest group of it is really citrus and avocado.
Wow, impressive. As someone who works in sustainability and works really closely with our student gardens, that's incredibly interesting.
And all the excess gets either donated or we play ding dong ditch with United States Postal Service and family members. Well, we'll put a box of fruit in and send it to them, and it shows up at their door.
That's cool. So what's a typical day like between fruit trees, gardening, and managing IT?
Yeah, my typical day is, a role like mine is heavily communicating. So I'm constantly communicating. So I get on my Zoom horse at about 7:30 in the morning. And I ride from Zoom horse to Zoom horse and get off my Zoom horse at the end of the day. So it's a lot of Zoom sessions, phone sessions. Occasionally I have to analyze data myself and prepare my own thoughts and thinking and communications for my staff, but it's a heavily communication-oriented role. So I'm always talking either to my staff, my peers in the cabinet and their units and peers, and definitely focused on the topics of the day, no question.
Your experience has been described as a rare combination of academic, business, and IT strategy, with a focus on transformational leadership within IT, applying leading edge approaches to current business challenges. Was this how you envisioned your career? Like, had you planned it out this way?
Oh gosh, no. I was a studio art undergraduate major first. And then I discovered starving artist is not a metaphor, it's reality. And I wasn't good enough of an artist to make a go of it. So I switched to communications and was a journalist. In fact, editor of my student newspaper in college, and then later professional journalist. And then along the way, I discovered computing, but made a detour into general accounting as a general manager for a retail chain. And then later into computers proper. And so, no, absolutely not. Most people, don't really plan a career, and I don't think it's wise to overplan it anyway. All I simply did was ask myself a couple questions. Do I really enjoy what I'm doing now? And do I have an idea of what I might be interested in next? And so I only pursued that which I loved. And the basic concept here is you won't get good at anything unless you deeply love the thing you're doing. And so that's just the way it's worked, and it's for the last 40 years, that's how it's been.
I can relate in some respect. My bachelor's is in accounting, and now I'm doing sustainability. And it was, just an opportunity that presented itself, and I grew to love what I was doing, and then chose to pursue that as a field.
Yeah, and I'll give a little twist on that. People often think they have to respond to opportunities, but I look at it the other way around. The opportunity presents itself to the person based around the orientation and interests and skills of the person. So in a way, the job selects the person, just as the wand selects the wizard from Harry Potter. I think there's very much truth to that. And so it's a process of discovering what it is you're really meant to do. And then working in that.
Most of my entire career has been in working in nonprofits or a university, and so I have my perspective on it. But for you, what has been the biggest difference that you see working in different organizations?
Right. Yeah, my background, because it's been diverse, especially in consulting, where I was inside many different industries, Fortune 500 firms, and different domains, from discrete manufacturing, oil and gas, to retail, financial services, et cetera. And then owning my own business and selling it to a publicly traded firm, and being inside a technology firm during Internet One. I've come to discover that there is more commonality between organizations than people realize. So higher education, to me, doesn't feel horribly different from a business. If you're in a business that's publicly traded, the need for quarterly profit is extreme, and that is one very big difference. Higher education affords a longer time horizon, and we're very mission-driven. But outside of that, we're as competitive as any corporate entity out there. Universities are very competitive creatures. So, and we're very innovative. We're very vibrant. We're almost rambunctious, which I think is really good. And so, to me, it doesn't feel horribly different, except in the governance side of it, dealing with state governments and legislatures. And on the time horizon that we operate under, which is often much longer than many, especially publicly traded firms do.
Technology is ever changing. So what would you recommend to staff who are interested in entering the field?
Well, that's really interesting. I left greenhouse work because at the time when I was young, I thought it was mindless labor, and it took so long for change. And now that I'm older, I'm driven to my greenhouse and my orchard because of those reasons. And so I advise people yes, technology is very fast changing. It's an industry where every 3-4 years, you have got to reskill. You're constantly reskilling. So if you're a continuous learner and you just love playing with the technology, this is a great industry. There's just no shortage of interest, opportunity. As we know, ups or downs in the economy, there's been practically little unemployment in this sector. The sky's the limit. It's limited by your own ambition. And so to me, it's love all the angles of it, pursue what lots of things to pursue. The fast pace of change is what usually drives people to it as well.
Sure.
There's a lot of change.
In 2019, you were inducted into the CIO Hall of Fame. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
How does one get selected, and what was it like to receive that honor?
Well, when I received it, I had two reactions. One, I cried. The second one was I called them and I said, I'm not dead yet. I'm not retired. And they're like, no, we give the award even to working CIOs too. And well, for me personally, because I've dedicated my life to technology, and I have plenty of opportunity to deviate from that in the past. And I discovered long ago, technology are like stray kittens to me. They show up at my door and I keep feeding them, and then there's 30 of them around my house. So rather than try to shoo them away, I might as well just be the feeder of technology. So I made the decision some time ago to do that. In fact, if you look at my Twitter account, that's my personal mission statement professionally, right there on my Twitter account. And I wrote that somewhere in my mid to late 30s. It hasn't changed a jot since then. So for me, the Hall of Fame award was the culmination of everything I've done, and it was a great honor. And it was just, to be I think the 5th CIO in higher ed to get that award was a great honor. I'm now a judge on these awards as well by being a virtue of that. In a way, it's somewhat humbling as well. But on the other hand, you got to forget about it because it doesn't mean anything, because tomorrow's a new day and there's new challenges tomorrow.
Sure.
So part of me is forget about it. You're not as good as you think you are.
Got to keep going.
Yeah.
So one thing I've learned in serving as the Staff Association Chair-elect is that IT has been working a hybrid work arrangement even prior to the pandemic.
Yes.
How would you describe the successes and challenges that your team has experienced both pre-pandemic and ongoing currently?
Correct. I think the bigger challenge has been accommodating Zoom or something like that, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, as a first choice in interactions, collaborations, and meetings, not a second choice. And that took a couple months, even because we did this pre-pandemic. So we had to leave our space, Torrey Pines Center South, and we call that our diaspora era, where we were just spread across different parts of campus. And then we came back to that place only to then be shooed out pretty quickly because of COVID. But during that period of time, we got very good at doing hybrid meetings with people in the building and people remotely all the time. And that was a very important process to go through because as we return to campus, everybody's going to experience that. Now, it does require enough of a facility, something like a decent sized screen and a decent camera where you can actually project the people in the room and the people coming in Zoom at the same time. But once you have the facility set up like that, it's rather natural. And so part of our space in Torrey Pines was to be this highly collaborative hybrid type space where you can just drop in on a think room, fire up a Zoom session, collaborate with 4 people on different parts of campus or from home. And so it's a little bit of a learning period of time there, but just a few months. I think the IT worker takes to it naturally. Obviously, the whole industry has been doing this for a very long time in IT, and that's why I pushed it when I got here. That certainly was my consulting past. We never were in our offices. We were always distributed. So I thought we could work that way naturally. And I think a lot of workers appreciate it because it helps, reduce their commute time, takes a couple hours out of, back in their day. So I think it's been a very positive thing for us.
That's great. Well, we can learn from you.
Yep.
What has been the biggest challenge for IT with so many of us working remotely?
The biggest challenge, has been, quite frankly, even where I live, my internet bandwidth isn't so great in Escondido here, so I'm sort of held captive by AT&T. That they're our provider, and so it's not a great service, and we don't have any options. So different regions of San Diego area are going to have different levels of technology bandwidth to their home, and that's usually challenge one. Challenge two is interference with Wi-Fi signals in the home are actually far more pernicious than people realize. And that interference can come from Bluetooth devices, microwaves. So the biggest recommendation I have for people is make sure you're doing your Wi-Fi at that 5 gigahertz frequency at home. And wherever possible, turn off as many Bluetooth devices when you're doing Zoom. And as you see me, I'm dialing in on my cell phone while I have the audio. I do that all the time, so that I might get a degradation of signal because of the two coming across. So just learning those, what I call digital survival skills.
I like that. We did receive some questions about working a hybrid schedule. The university has indicated support for flexible work arrangements, including hybrid. In what ways is the university building out the infrastructure to support hybrid work?
Well, the infrastructure comes in a couple different ways. We have all the cloud-based tools, so that infrastructure is in place. The other pieces now are support for managers and supervisors, because some supervisors are uncomfortable with everybody working remotely. They feel like they can't keep tabs on them. But if management in the area starts to put together a good, what I call management by numbers or management by outcomes, management by results approach, then having a workforce distributed shouldn't matter at all. So I think there's things we can do to help supervisors kind of come over into managing in the hybrid world. Like I said, I've been doing this my whole life in technology from almost day one. So we take it as second nature how to manage a distributed workforce across different regions and time zones, even in consulting. So I think there's work we can do to help the supervisor out. Proper ergonomics in the home is important. And then the biggest sin we make is we sit too long. We got to get up and move. So not everything has to be Zoom. You can do walk and talk. So I encourage my staff, go on a walk and call me, and we'll have our call, walk and talk. We won't do it Zoom sitting. Get out, stretch your legs, and that's fine. So try to build walking and talking in as much as possible.
Yeah, it's so important. And getting outside, getting that fresh air,
Yeah.
getting some sunshine, especially living in San Diego, we need to take
Yeah.
advantage of that.
Yeah.
What is your vision for the future workplace being online?
Well, that's a really good question. And I would say my vision would be different people work in different ways, right? So some people are I'm a fantastic work from home person, always have been. When I had my own business, I had a partner, and he was the opposite. He's like, I just can't work from home. I have to come into the office. So if you come in the office, I'll work wherever the client is or from home, or that's okay. So I think my vision is flexible and adaptive to the needs of the workforce. What enables that person to work the best way that they can? And for me, I take a slightly more radical view of this. In IT, if you want to work, if you're a night owl and you want to work later in the evenings, that's fine. I'm not hung up on that. Now we have service that we got to provide our customers here on campus, and so we need strict hours for that. But for a lot of the work we do, it could be any time of the day or the week. So flexibility to enable top talent to stay here and be productive, and probably the even bigger for me is this work-family balance. So when my kids are older, they're out, but when I was younger, there was a lot of stress and pressure between work and family. And this hits hard on women. So I have a real particular sensitivity to how can we do this that enables the women and the men and other workers to take advantage of the work-family balance issues that they have. I have a fear that maybe this causes work to show up around the clock all the time. And you heard me earlier talk about the orchard. Why do I have an orchard? My cell phone isn't at me. I'm in the orchard. So I'm not hearing the thing buzz or the ring, and I do that deliberately. And again, people are different. Some people can deal with the interruption. Others really need to compartmentalize their time. So I think finding for each person their optimum way of working is really my vision.
Yeah.
To do that, I think that's an engaged staff is a great staff. It's a great university.
Yeah, I do think we've learned a lot from this experience that we didn't ask for and we didn't plan for.
Yep.
And a lot of good can come out of it.
Yep.
So you did talk a little bit about it briefly, and I don't know if this is the right term or not, but I've heard the term Zoom room. You had mentioned a room where you have a camera and a screen so people can see each other. Is that what that is?
Yeah, we call
Okay.
them the Zoom rooms. It's a room just set up to, you can plug a laptop in or a tablet in, and you got different little connections to connect the video up. And then there's usually a speakerphone and a phone connection so that you can project speakers. So lots of different options to come in and sort of instantly start up a Zoom session and start to go.
So is there?
Yeah, that's going to take some time. That's going to take some time to redo our facilities to take advantage of that. It's just a time-consuming process to do that.
And so the way it works is that there's 12 people on a Zoom call, and half of them are in the room and half of them are from home, but you all feel like you're together?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, absolutely right. Yeah, that's the whole idea. In fact, we did that on campus before the COVID because people are like, I'm not going to drive to Torrey Pines from center of campus. I'm just let's do a Zoom. And so, yeah, that makes sense. It shaves 20 minutes off of commute time from you, or 15 minutes. And so we did lots of that. And so I think, making that fluid and a little more natural. Now, some people, we're technologists. A lot of us, that's what we do. We get real good at that. Some people have a harder time with it. I still do technology support with my mom, and this is always a constant support issue with my mom about how to use Zoom.
Yep.
So different people are going to have different skill levels with the technology. But yes, how can we make those rooms flexible enough that people can just drop in, fire up a laptop, fire up a Zoom session, have a screen going, and have 2 or 3 people jump in.
And so you said we already have some of those.
In Torrey Pines, in our redesigned facility, we took away all offices. I don't have an office. I have the end of a table, literally the end of a table. Because we wanted to democratize the view. It's Torrey Pines Center South, and the view is of Torrey Pines and the ocean. Mm-hmm. Why line that with offices? I was in one of those offices, and I had an epiphany. Somebody ran in my office because Barack Obama was golfing, and they said, "Did you see the president? Did you see the president?" I'm like, "No, he was just there." Well, he was there, and I was so busy at my computer, I didn't even notice. I'm like, "Well, why do I have an office with a view like that if I'm not taking advantage of it? What the heck is that?" Right? So when we resigned our space, we got rid of all offices. Nobody has an office. Now there's lots of think rooms, so everybody can have an office for however long they want, whether they can reserve it for a week, a quarter, a month, or just drop in. Almost everybody does drop in. So if you're walking around the office, you say, "I need a think room," and then you have a conversation. We got some of those where you can screen off and make it not visible so you can't see what's inside. So we designed the facility to have a variety of different room sizes and shapes for different types of collaboration.
That's awesome. Yes, speaking of Torrey Pines, we have the US Open coming up this week.
Yes.
Do you think that in-person meetings will go away?
No, I don't think in-person meetings will go away. I think they're part of human nature. I think, what's interesting is we just had a meeting of folks in my unit, and, they can tend to be a little bit like knives out, competitive with each other. And we haven't seen each other in such a long time. I never saw so much hugging and crying in my life because they hadn't seen each other. And even my senior team said we have to invest in our own time together. And so we're doing face-to-face as we start to come to campus here, but now in a more intentional way. So we're reserving it for forward-looking planning and sort of mini retreats, so to speak. Face-to-face will always be here, especially for when, you know, I think about the asymmetry of information between the parties. If you have somebody onboarding, for example, and they have to absorb a lot, and absorbing a lot is also getting to know the other people, not just in a Zoom tile, but as a walking, living, breathing human being. And so some of those sessions are probably going to be best done face-to-face. So I think it'll be a pure hybrid world. I think, you know, it'll be a mix of all the above. And I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Just participating in meetings over the last year plus, it does feel like we come to this space with our agenda and we stay on topic. We don't have that opportunity to have the side conversations, given there's other people in this space with us, and you don't have those breaks in between the meetings or the conference or whatever it is, and that human interaction is so important.
It is. Now, I'll give you, there's an anecdote we've been doing. We've been using Microsoft Teams for drop-in. Literally, you just say, let me call you, and you hit the call button, and suddenly you're talking to each other with a video session. So we've done tons of drop-in with each other in ITS, and that seems to work well. Now, I just saw Kevin Chow here not too long ago, face-to-face. First time we've seen each other face-to-face in 14 months. And we're like, oh, yeah. Now, what's weird, because we've done so much telepresence, you know, the video and the Zoom rooms and that, it doesn't feel like 14 months per se. So I think the hybrid can work, but you got to maintain the face-to-face as part of that.
Right. Well, speaking of, has there been any discussion about which will be the primary enterprise on campus? OneDrive, Google Drive, maybe something we've never heard of?
We're in a multiverse world, so Google and Microsoft are here to stay. They're not going away. This, again, technology changes, so you never know 3-4 years from now what's going to happen with all these technologies. So my view is, especially in these classes of technology, keep our options open. And by the way, we're a complex place with what I call microcultures and microclimates all over the place. And it's okay if we have some diversity and collaboration tools, if it works well with that micro, you know, that little group or that area, provided it doesn't impede larger communication. But so far, it's been, I think, working pretty well with the collection of tools we've got. And so, no, there's in the great epic battle between Microsoft and Google, there will be no winner here.
Yeah, there's definitely groups of people that I notice like to use MS Teams over Zoom. It just always catches me off guard when I go to click on the invite, and then I'm like, wait, what background do I have going? Like, it catches me off guard.
Yeah, and IT professional, you know, everybody gets attached to some tool or another, but I think when you get older and wiser, you realize it's just a tool. All of them are good, so there's no sense getting overly attached.
True. Let's talk about the UC's response to the recent data breach. How does it compare to how other industries respond?
Well, I'm not going to critique UC just yet. What I will say is the cybersecurity landscape is shifting rather significantly in the last few years. It is now a persistent collection of state threats coming from principally Russia and China that are orchestrating long-running, consistent, focused efforts to infiltrate systems for different reasons. In some cases, especially from China, it's for theft of intellectual property and collection of information. In the case of the Soviet and Russian areas, it's bringing down an infrastructure. So things are going to change here in the future. We're going to be in a very, very persistent threat landscape. and it's getting more sophisticated as each day goes by. So these attacks are getting more sophisticated. So we have got to get sophisticated in our response. So I think the whole world is experiencing this, especially every part of the American economy. So while UC has been hit with this, so have been lots of big companies have been hit with this. And so my only advice to folks is get familiar with identity theft software and services, and two-factor authentication is a huge defense in all of this. Use two-factor authentication everywhere. All of us have to learn to live in this threat landscape. There's going to be no easy solution here. In time, I believe all organizations, including us, will adjust and respond appropriately to that level of threat. But it's going to be, I hate to say it, it's cyber warfare right now, and it's going to be that way for the rest of our lives, I think.
Are there protocols in place if someone feels like their personal information and privacy is being used improperly?
Absolutely, they can call our service desk and state that, and we'll route them to our security professionals who can help. You can also follow the links at the UCOP site for the identity services that are listed there. I strongly encourage that for folks. It can be a little disturbing starting to learn where different parts of your either email address and or even passwords are out on the dark web. But you need to get familiar with that. That's just part of the digital jungle now. Password maintenance and two-factor authentication are part of the digital jungle. So definitely you can call our help desk, and they'll get you routed to the right person to help with that. And then there's also the tools at the UCOP website for the Kellen breach, and you can explore all those tools there.
Perfect. Given the recent surge in ransomware attacks, what new programs will UC San Diego implement to guard against these attacks?
Well, we've already implemented a bunch, and the first step is two-factor authentication everywhere, especially server administrative accounts everywhere. Raising patch levels on servers everywhere, and doing it in a timely basis. If you miss a patch by 3 or 4 days, that's enough to compromise you, right? So you've got to keep the patching cycle up. The two-factor authentication is a big line of defense. Having what we call ransomware resilient backups is also very important. We do that in our central admin systems, but making sure everybody can do that and giving advice to especially any distributed unit that has some local technology how to do that. Those are all pieces to it. Programs we are putting in place right now is helping people understand that we all have to review our practices here periodically. And so getting insight and review, and we'll call review of the practices across the board periodically, are going to be very important. This is sort of like brushing your teeth daily. If you want to avoid gum disease, you got to brush your teeth daily. If you want to avoid getting hacked, you got to do certain hygiene stuff daily. A lot of people don't like it. I shouldn't be able to do this. I can't change the nature of the threat.
Sure.
All I can do is change our response to it and get us as safe as possible.
I don't know that I fully understand this question that we received, but it says, is a replicated network system that's isolated from the working system possible because it could be brought online post ransom attack? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, well, no is the right answer to say there. That's not necessarily the best approach thinking. The concept of network segmentation, of breaking networks down into isolated units, is correct. But that can be done in an extraordinarily complex and nuanced way across the board. And we already do a bunch of that, certainly between health, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and other places on campus. But by and large, a university is more like a city. So we have 60, 70, 80,000 people each day walking into our digital properties between patients, visitors, students, and employees. So it's a decent sized city. And so the networks are going to be as heterogeneous and diverse as the city is. So just simply cleaving networks into two doesn't really cut it. There's another concept that we call graceful degradation and compartmentalizing risk. Yeah, that might be what we're going to do in the future here, but and what we're doing right now, but not bifurcation in those lines is not the right way to think about it.
One of the questions we received was, since COVID, communication and outreach are even more vital to the campus IT community. What is your strategy for this?
Well, there's two strategies. There's the strategy one, which has been doing more town halls, more email communication, and more broad communication. And that's, this is an example of it right here, right? And certainly that's part of the strategy. But the other strategy is to help managers flow the information downward. Our weakest link tends to be the last mile of vertical communication. And that comes from building great teamwork. Now in ITS, we encourage tons of lateral communication between our units. So we treat our organization kind of like our Torrey Pine Space, flat and relatively, open. So everybody has the right of lateral communication. So we try to build what are called cultural norms within our areas to encourage that communication. We can push communication down, like crazy. That doesn't necessarily mean it gets absorbed. So the pull aspect of information is helping managers and supervisors consume, share with their teammates, and responding to teammates, their team players, when they request and want to pull the information. So it's a combination of the top down and the bottom up.
So we did just receive a question of, how does a leader in an organization like ITS influence and change the culture to create a more diverse and inclusive climate for everyone and influence other units across campus similarly?
Well, leaders have a big role to play here, and it's in our actions that do it. So who we select to join the organization matters greatly. Who we promote matters greatly. And then how we interact on a daily basis. I think the wonderful thing about technology is, I'd like to say great things come in sometimes interesting packages. Meaning you see somebody and you think, oh, they can't possibly be good at that because of your own bias or background. But when you turn them loose and watch them perform, watch their outcome, great things can happen. Just as symphonies have done blind auditions, right, in order to weed out some biases, a similar thing can occur in technology. And what I like about that is I'm constantly surprised by the performance we get from all parts of the background and the different types of people we have here. It almost doesn't matter. So how to be as encouraging of that participation as possible is important. Another piece of this is when we have to respond to a situation and make decisions, it is great to have different diverse backgrounds and perspectives, different cognitive styles, different orientations, because you'll get different representations of information that help you sort out what needs to happen next. And so getting managers to the point where you want to encourage debate, you want to encourage dissension, but you at some point have to make a point to a decision. And to do that, you need diverse dissenting people. And now some dissenters sometimes irritate people, and that's okay. You just got to tell the organization, don't worry, they've got a good perspective here. Let's let that happen. So I think leaders have a lot to do in modeling the behavior, operating the behavior, and all of us have biases. Every single one of us. Every single one of us will bring, even those of us who are trying to be the most unbiased as possible, we bring biases in. The answer to that is community of people and recognition that we're all human, we all got biases, and together we're better. We're better together. And take advantage of the differences. I've seen it work in technology all the time. I remember a woman who, she was first generation, she was an immigrant from China, and she was a grader for me in one of my classes. And she was quiet as a mouse. You never would have known it. Her grading was so good. I called her outside. I said, you should be teaching this class the way you're grading. And I said, you should apply for jobs, in my unit. And she wasn't getting hired because the verbal presentation she was giving was not matching the intellectual tiger that lied within. So I finally just said, dang gummit, we've got to take advantage of this talent. Oh, she did crazy good, right? So leaders have to figure out how to use the right skill in people and get the most promise out of them without regard to the convention or the bias of the team. And that is so critical. So I think leaders have a lot to do with that.
Agreed. So our last question is going to be that you joined UC San Diego in 2016, and how has the campus changed in terms of technology?
Oh, well, part of that is a little bit of me there. The first thing we're doing is we're getting rid of all of our COBOL mainframe systems. So we're nearly done with our cloud journey. So we've got the vast majority of all of our new systems entirely in the cloud. And that's very important for so many reasons. I can't go into all of them here, but basically it's a way of ensuring that our infrastructure will survive into the future well. Because now we're on an infrastructure that's shared with the larger American economy, not just our own little economy here. And that's very important. Two, it's enabled great things that we've been able to do with COVID without much effort, which is expand the use of Canvas, expand the use of Zoom. A lot of people say, can Zoom keep up? Well, between Zoom, Amazon, and all the cloud providers, they did keep up. And that's some of the beauty of the cloud technology in the cloud market. So that has certainly changed. I think where we need, and certainly we've tried to bring a lot of Lean Six Sigma and continuous improvement thinking into what we do. And so I think that's certainly changed a bit. I think where we need to go next is to get even better at it. This is a great university. It is a world-class university. It is a top tier of the major league universities. We need to have top tier major league commitment to furthering what we do here, certainly with technology, and especially where technology meets people.
So we are technically out of time. I did want to thank everyone for the questions that they have submitted. The ones that we didn't get to today, we are going to forward to VC Kellen's office for response. I did say we had our last question, but it wasn't really the last question, because I always like to end with asking you a very personal question, which is, what is your favorite cupcake?
Well, chocolate on chocolate, chocolate. So it's the one weakness I have in life, and that's chocolate. So
that's okay. That's a good weakness to have.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Vince. It was a great conversation, and I hope everyone else has enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Jen.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. This was recorded, so if you missed any part of it, you should be able to catch it on our Staff Association website pretty soon. And I invite you to stay tuned with the Staff Association, as we will be planning activities for the summer, albeit in a Zoom environment, and hopefully soon we can have some in-person events and get to reconnect with all of you. So thank you again for spending your time with us. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week ahead. Bye-bye.